Los Pepes. Pablo Escobar was killing police officers faster than Colombia could replace them. He had placed bounties on law enforcement, reportedly around $3,000 per dead officer. Bombs were detonating in Bogotá shopping centers. Politicians who opposed him turned up dead. Escobar was hiding somewhere in Medellin, running his operation from safe houses, and the official manhunt had been grinding for over a year, with nothing to show for it. Then, a new force entered the hunt. They called themselves Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. The group was built from Escobar's enemies, former cartel associates he had betrayed, paramilitary figures, and members of the rival Cali cartel who bankrolled much of the operation. They had informants inside Escobar's network, and they used that access with precision. Within months, Los Pepes had assassinated over 300 people connected to Escobar: lawyers, accountants, relatives, associates, and cartel soldiers. They burned his prized collection of antique cars. They destroyed his ranch properties. They killed his personal attorney twice over, first his lawyer, then his replacement. Declassified documents later confirmed what many suspected. Colombian military intelligence was sharing information with Los Pepes, and American surveillance assets were feeding intelligence into the same pipeline that the death squad was drawing from. Escobar was later found dead on a Medellin rooftop on December 2, 1993, one day after his 44th birthday, shot through the ear. Marianne Bachmeier walked into a Lübeck courtroom with a Beretta in her handbag and shot the man who killed her daughter 7 times. Klaus Grabowski was on trial for the murder of 7-year-old Anna Bachmeier. In May 1980, he had lured Anna into his apartment near their shared neighborhood in Lübeck, Germany. He strangled her with her own tights and hid her body in a cardboard box. Anna had left the house that morning to avoid going to school. She was missing for 2 days before her body was found. Grabowski's defense at trial took a direction that broke something open in Marianne. His lawyers argued that Anna had seduced him, that a 7-year-old girl had initiated the encounter that led to her own death. Marianne sat in that courtroom and listened to the argument being made with a straight face by men in suits. On March the 6th, 1981, 6 shots into the proceedings, she stood up, pulled the Beretta from her bag, and fired 8 rounds across the courtroom. 6 connected. Grabowski collapsed and died before an ambulance arrived. Marianne was arrested immediately. At trial, she was convicted of manslaughter, receiving a sentence of 6 years. She served less than 3. German public opinion fractured sharply. Half the country called her a murderer. The other half called her something closer to a mother who had no options left. She died of pancreatic cancer in 1996, aged 46. In interviews near the end of her life, she expressed no regret about what she had done, only about losing Anna. A mother walked into a courtroom seeking justice and decided in real time to become it. The Montana Vigilantes. The man running the law in Bannock, Montana, was also running the criminals. Henry Plummer was elected sheriff in 1863. Charming, well-dressed, and well-spoken. Exactly the kind of man a lawless gold rush town wanted behind a badge. What the town didn't know was that Plummer was simultaneously leading a road agent gang called the Innocents. They robbed gold shipments. They killed anyone who got in the way. And because Plummer controlled the only law enforcement operation within hundreds of miles, the bodies just kept piling up. Over roughly 18 months, the Innocents were linked to at least 102 murders across the Montana territory. By late 1863, a group of miners had seen enough. They organized in secret, called themselves the Montana Vigilantes, and built a network fast. Members identified each other through a coded signal, the numbers 3777, the meaning of which has never been definitively explained. Some historians believe it referred to grave dimensions. Whatever it meant, the men who received it on a note pinned to their door understood it as a final warning. The campaign moved quickly. Over roughly 3 months, the Vigilantes hanged 21 men. Plummer himself was executed on January 10, 1864, on the very gallows he had ordered built as sheriff. He reportedly begged for his life until the rope went taut. The Vigilantes disbanded shortly after, leaving behind no courts, no trials, and no formal record of who made the decisions. Just 21 graves and a territory that finally exhaled. The law had failed Montana, so Montana became the law. The Skidmore conspiracy. Ken McElroy had been charged with felonies over 20 times and never spent a single day in prison. Skidmore was a small town of roughly 400 people, and for nearly 20 years, McElroy ruled it through fear. He stole livestock, threatened families, and made life miserable for anyone who stood against him. Witnesses would agree to testify, then suddenly back out before court. Those who didn't faced retaliation. Property destroyed, animals killed, families stalked. Over time, the system stopped working. Charges piled up, but nothing stuck. The breaking point came in 1980 when McElroy shot an elderly grocer, Bo Bowenkamp, during a dispute over a candy bar. Bowenkamp survived. McElroy was convicted of assault, his first conviction after years of accusations, but was released on bond and returned to town almost immediately. He walked into the local bar carrying a rifle. On July 10, 1981, dozens of residents gathered to discuss what to do. Shortly after, McElroy stepped outside, got into his truck, and was shot in broad daylight. Witnesses filled the street. Shots rang out. He died instantly. When police questioned the crowd, every answer matched. No one saw anything. No one knew who fired. No one has ever been charged. The case remains officially unsolved. 30 to 60 people watched a man die and decided, collectively, that justice had finally arrived. The Gulabi Gang. In rural Uttar Pradesh, beating your wife was just something men did. The abuse was open, familiar, and largely ignored. Police rarely stepped in. Village elders looked the other way. Women who tried to report violence were dismissed, laughed at, or sent back to the same homes they were trying to escape. In Banda district, this wasn't seen as a crisis. It was treated as routine life. Sampat Paldevi grew up in that environment. Married at 12 and raising 5 children by her early 20s, she had seen the pattern repeat across families for years. Then, in 2006, she stepped into it herself. A man was beating his wife in public. Sampat confronted him. He turned on her. She returned the next day with 5 women. They beat him with bamboo sticks until he stopped. That moment sparked something bigger. The Gulabi Gang formed and quickly spread, drawing thousands of women across multiple states, all dressed in pink saris. They confronted abusive men in public, forced police to file ignored complaints, and intervened in child marriages. In some cases, they surrounded government offices and refused to leave until action was taken. The pink became a warning. As the movement grew, so did internal divisions and political tension. Questions began to surface about control and direction. The system they challenged started shaping them in return. Undeniably, an army of women in pink saris had shaken a system that had ignored them for generations. Operation Nemesis. The men who ordered the Armenian genocide were living comfortably in Europe, and the world had decided to move on. By 1919, the Ottoman Empire had fallen, and its key leaders, Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha, and Samal Pasha, had escaped to European cities. An Ottoman tribunal sentenced them to death, but enforcement never followed. There was no system to bring them back, no international court to act. Around 1.5 million Armenians had been killed, yet those responsible were free, blending into everyday life. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation chose to act where the system failed. They created Operation Nemesis, identifying senior officials tied directly to the genocide. Each operative was assigned a specific target, given the means to carry it out, and sent alone. On March 15, 1921, Soghomon Tehlirian approached Talat Pasha on a Berlin street and shot him at close range. He did not flee. He waited for police. At trial, survivors described the deportations, death marches, and mass killings. The jury listened. Tehlirian was acquitted in less than an hour. The operation continued across Europe, resulting in the deaths of multiple former officials linked to the genocide. The case also reached a young lawyer, Raphael Lemkin, who later coined the term genocide and helped shape modern international law. Vigilante justice in a Berlin street directly shaped the legal architecture that governs war crimes today. The Bakassi Boys. Armed robbery in southeastern Nigeria had gotten so bad that markets were closing before noon. You see, after military rule collapsed in the late 1990s, the security vacuum in states like Abia and Anambra filled with criminal gangs that operated in broad daylight. Traders were robbed at gunpoint on their way to work. Buses were hijacked on main roads. Police stations existed mostly on paper. In the commercial city of Aba, shop owners stopped restocking their shelves because the odds of getting robbed before they could sell anything were simply too high. So the traders organized themselves. A group of shoe market merchants in Aba formed the nucleus of what became the Bakassi Boys, a vigilante force armed with machetes, locally made weapons, and a claim that would define their entire operation. They said their blades were spiritually fortified, enchanted, capable of identifying guilt on contact. Suspects brought before them would allegedly confess the moment the machete touched their skin. Whether anyone truly believed this or whether fear did the work, the confessions came. The group's reputation spread faster than their actual reach. Armed robbers who had terrorized communities for years reportedly fled entire districts when word arrived that the Bakassi Boys were moving in. In their first year of operation, violent crime in parts of Abia State dropped sharply enough that 2 state governors, Abia's Orji Uzorkalu and Anambra's Chinwoke Mbadanuju, formally recognized the group and put them on government payroll. That decision changed everything. State sponsorship turned a community defense force into something with no accountability and no ceiling. By 2002, Human Rights Watch had documented hundreds of extrajudicial killings, innocent people tortured into false confessions, executed publicly, and buried without record. The enchanted machetes had stopped finding criminals. They were just finding bodies. A group born to protect traders had become the thing the traders needed protecting from: the San Francisco Committee of Vigilance. San Francisco's courts were not broken. They were bought. The gold rush had turned the city into one of the fastest growing places on earth, and the criminal class had kept pace with every step. A gang of Australian ex-convicts known as the Sydney Ducks controlled the waterfront, running extortion, robbery, and arson so openly that fires kept tearing through city blocks with suspicious regularity. Judges were bribed. Sheriffs looked the other way. Criminals walked out of courtrooms and back onto the same streets the same afternoon. In 1851, 200 prominent citizens had enough. They formed the first Committee of Vigilance, set up their own tribunal, and started making arrests. Within In weeks, they had tried and hanged 4 men, flogged others publicly, and deported dozens more onto outbound ships. The city watched and largely approved. Then they stood down, and within a few years, the rot returned. By 1856, the committee reassembled, bigger, angrier, and significantly better armed. At its peak, the second committee had over 6,000 enrolled members and access to a functioning cannon. They built their own fortified headquarters, which locals called Fort Gunnybags. They hanged 4 more men, including a city councilman. They forced the resignation of elected officials at gunpoint and deported political figures they deemed corrupt. The governor of California declared the city in a state of insurrection. The committee ignored him. After 3 months, they dissolved again, voluntarily, having decided the job was done. 6,000 armed civilians had overruled the state government of California, and the state never fully recovered its authority in San Francisco for years afterward.